Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from the Netherlands, Dutch language English subs, released in the year 2014, directed by Chris W. Mitchell, and this film is called The Pool. So The Pool is about a family and some family friends that decide to go camping one weekend. So they arrive at this site that's very secluded, it's near a lagoon, and they believe that this is the perfect opportunity to really have some fun. And so they all set up and they start to do activities together, but then all of a sudden some inner fighting starts that really puts this trip at risk. So the guy who came up with this idea to have this trip, he's trying desperately to hold this family together with the friends, but unfortunately when evening approaches, strange things start to happen, and the families and the friends start to believe it has something to do with this small pool that is nearby. So as the situation starts to get more complicated, danger is going to start to arise, and it may or may not be connected to something paranormal that happened in this lagoon sort of pool area many years previous. And so whether or not that's the case is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Pool. I'm not really that familiar with Dutch horror films. I'm not really that familiar with Dutch films in general, and so coming into The Pool I was actually quite excited to see what the Netherlands were actually going to produce in this experience. I thought it looked like a paranormal kind of film. Now paranormal movies aren't my kind of thing, but I was willing to give this a go because of the fact it was a movie from the Netherlands. And so the Netherlands haven't produced many horror films that have actually hit the worldwide stage, and so The Pool was one of those movies that actually got some attention, so that was an added factor to actually make myself excited to actually branch out and experience a horror film from a different region of Europe. And so with the expectation levels at an exciting level, I will say that this movie was very lackluster. It did have its moments, but unfortunately as far as a consistent piece, it wasn't overly scary, and I didn't really feel as though the story behind this pool was overly interesting as well. And so the movie does have a lot of issues, and unfortunately it outweighs the positives. Now I will say the positives to this movie, production wise it is very good, and it does have a creepy atmosphere, and it does promise something that unfortunately it doesn't ultimately deliver, but I thought as though that promise that something was going to be delivered keeps you sustained from the start up until the last quarter of the film, but unfortunately it does run out of steam by the time it approaches the finish and that big conclusion. And so the characters I thought were fairly likeable, but you did have that sort of stereotypical formula where ultimately secrets come out within this family that are going to put a cat amongst the pigeons, and I just thought as though the whole film had something about it that was very familiar. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what this movie reminded me of, but I kept thinking is that this was just a recycled version of many movies that have come previous. It was a European horror film, but it definitely felt mainstream Hollywood in that it just doesn't really take a risk. It didn't really strive to make a shadow of its own, and that is ultimately what the problem is going to be. So cinematography, production-wise, acting was all fairly decent, but unfortunately it just holds at a very mediocre level in that it is decent to look at, it is decent with the acting, the script is decent, it doesn't create characters that you absolutely hate, but unfortunately it doesn't strive that extra distance to make it memorable. And so as the story goes along, you get a bit of an insight into the history of where they're camping, and again it's very vague, and so that vague quality it hits you in a way where I felt as though it was going through the motions. It wanted to make a feature film, but it wanted to make a feature film that was going to please everyone. It was a little bit too scared of actually making a shadow of its own, therefore having the risk of getting people to hate it. And so I felt as though Chris W. Mitchell was one of those directors who was afraid of negativity, afraid of criticism, so he was going to play it by the book. He wasn't going to put his neck on the chopping block, and unfortunately that is what makes a great director, in that you're willing to take risks. But I just thought the whole film had that lackluster approach that was afraid to stretch out its wings. It was afraid to be provocative, and unfortunately in today's world being provocative is frowned upon. But there are great directors, especially from Europe, such as Lars von Trier, Gaspar Noé, who can actually provoke that audience because they're not scared to do it. They have enough confidence in their own brand to actually realise that they have an acquired taste and that they have a fan base, and those movies are directed at a fan base, whereas this movie has a lack of identity. I never felt as though it really had its own style, and unfortunately, as I said, it's just bits and pieces from films that you've seen before, and it just doesn't really amount to anything. There is a few gory scenes here and there are a few effective scenes, but unfortunately it just doesn't have a heart of its own. It doesn't know what its identity is, and it just can't really separate itself from the crowd as far as horror films are concerned. So as far as Netherlands and Dutch horror is concerned, it really doesn't provide anything of interest. Unfortunately, it was definitely an underwhelming experience, and so for that I'm going to give The Pool 2 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.